What would you do if you inherited a mansion and found out it had been feeding on the lives of children for nearly 100 years? This isn't a ghost story. This is one of the darkest family secrets in American history. Buried beneath velvet curtains and polished portraits in a forgotten New England town. In this episode, we uncover what's really happened behind the sealed doors of the Whitmore house in Eldridge Hollow, a place locals still refuse to talk about. From ritual disappearances to generational silence, what you're about to hear may change the way you think about legacy, power, and the horrifying cost of prosperity. This isn't just a haunted house, it's a timeline of horror disguised as heritage. Stay with us as we unravel the truth hidden for 93 years. What they did in that basement will haunt you. Eleanor Graves wasn't the kind of woman who believed in haunted houses. She believed in documents, death records, and the cold, quiet facts no one dared to publish. But when a weather-stained envelope arrived bearing the seal of Whitmore and Langley attorneys, she felt something shift, like history itself was knocking. Inside was a deed, a name she hadn't heard in years, and an invitation to a mansion she barely remembered, the Whitmore estate, hidden deep in the woods of Eldridge Hollow. Locals called it cursed. Historians ignored it. And now, it belonged to her. She drove up expecting silence. What she found was a house that seemed to breathe. And what waited behind its walls was watching her before she even stepped inside. What if the inheritance you've been waiting for your whole life turns out to be the key to a 100-year-old ritual murder cult? Eleanor Graves was 28, sharp, solitary, and entirely too comfortable with silence. She wasn't famous, but in certain corners of the internet, the true crime forums, the dark archives, the podcast rabbit holes, her name carried weight. Eleanor specialised in cold cases no one wanted reopened. The kind with just enough dust to feel unsolvable, and just enough blood to keep you up at night. From her tiny North End apartment in Boston, she pieced together the overlooked The Missing Boys from 1957, the church fire nobody questioned, the family that vanished without packing a bag. She hunted whispers, clues that weren't meant to be found. Her inbox was always full of dead-end tips, urban legends, and half-truths. But one message changed everything. It wasn't a tip, it was a will. A legal notification that she had inherited a mansion in a place she'd never lived, from a woman she barely remembered. Agatha Whitmore, a name that didn't appear in any of her files until now. And what Eleanor didn't know yet was that this wasn't just her story. It was the last chapter in someone else's. She only met Agatha Whitmore twice, and both times felt like fiction. The first was the day Eleanor graduated from college. She was standing outside the auditorium in Boston, cap crooked, degree in hand, when a tall, elegant woman appeared beside her like smoke. She wore deep navy, pearls that looked older than the Constitution, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The truth has a way of finding those brave enough to seek it, she whispered, then disappeared before Eleanor could ask how she even knew her name. The second time was 6 years later in a closed casket. Eleanor didn't plan to attend the funeral, but something pulled her to that tiny chapel in Connecticut. No one there knew who she was. They all whispered in polite confusion, and the name Agatha Whitmore echoed through her mind like a bell toll. So when the letter arrived, thick cream stock, hand-stamped, legally airtight, Eleanor already knew what it was. What she didn't know was why. Agatha had no reason to leave her anything, let alone the Whitmore estate, a 12-bedroom Victorian mansion wrapped in forest and secrecy. And as she read the words "full legal heir," a chill crept up her spine. This wasn't a gift. It was an invitation. They say every town has a house the locals won't talk about. This one just happened to come with her name on the deed. The Whitmore estate was located on the outer edge of Eldridge Hollow, a forgotten textile town in rural Connecticut that used to hum with life and industry. In the late 1800s, it was a place of spindles and steam, where entire families worked the looms and generations lived under the shadow of the Whitmore name. But the mill closed in the 1960s, and the town never recovered. Now, Eldridge Hollow was a skeleton boarded windows, collapsing barns, and a population so small, the post office had been downsized into a shared storefront. And in the middle of all that rot, the mansion. 3 stories, 12 bedrooms, hand-carved staircases, servant quarters, a crumbling carriage house, and over 12 acres of land choked by ivy and fog. Local records said it had been built in 1887, the same year the Whitmore family opened their textile mill. It had never been sold, never been rented. It had always belonged to them. Eleanor stared at the file in her hands, back taxes totaling over $92,000, repair estimates in the hundreds of thousands, and a warning from the executor. No one has been inside in years. Be careful. But something about that house called to her, and something inside it had been waiting. From the moment her tires crunched over the gravel path, Eleanor knew the house wasn't empty. It was waiting. The sky above Eldridge Hollow was a pale, unblinking grey. The kind that pressed against your chest like a warning. The mansion rose from the ground like something half-remembered from a fever, dream, towering, breathless, still. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt aware, and the closer she stepped to the front door, the more it felt like it had already opened. From the inside. Eleanor wasn't here to stay. She was here to sell, sign, and disappear. She had packed light a thermos of gas station coffee, her Canon DSLR, and a manila folder containing every document tied to the Whitmore estate. The plan was simple. Snap a few photos, contact a historical realtor, and offload the house before the next property tax bill buried her alive. But as her car crept up the winding gravel drive, framed by blackened tree limbs and frost-bitten brush, the air seemed to shift. Her hands tightened on the wheel. The GPS glitched. The temperature dropped 3 degrees in under a mile. And then the mansion appeared, like it hadn't been built, but summoned. It stood tall, skeletal, beautiful in a way that felt wrong. Its shutters were shut like eyelids, yet she felt them watching. The white paint had curdled into a yellowing ivory, vines climbing its spine like veins. The wind stopped, the trees stopped, even the birds were gone. And Eleanor, despite herself, stopped too. There was something about this place, a stillness too precise, a silence too rehearsed. It didn't feel like a place frozen in time. It felt like something was waking up, and it had been waiting for her arrival. It didn't look like a house. It looked like a monument to something no one dared remember. Autumn in Eldridge Hollow was supposed to be golden, crisp, postcard perfect. But the land surrounding the Whitmore estate felt untouched by the season. The trees weren't orange or amber. They were stripped bare, clawing at the sky like blackened fingers. The air carried no scent of leaves or smoke, only something colder, metallic, like old breath locked in a coffin. The sky above was a sheet of ash, unmoving, heavy, and the mansion itself, 3 stories of pale decay, stood like a cathedral abandoned mid-prayer. Its white paint had weathered into a sickly bone grey, chipped like peeling skin. The windows were sealed with grime and dust so thick they looked frosted from the inside. Eleanor counted at least 18 windows, and not a single curtain had moved. Not once, not even with the wind. The shutters, once ornamental, hung crooked like broken limbs. The porch sagged, the iron gate had rusted shut, but still there was no sign of collapse. Just preservation. Intentional. Like something didn't want this house to be forgotten. And as Eleanor approached the door, she realized this wasn't just architecture. It was a warning carved in wood and silence. The moment Eleanor stepped inside, the air hit her like a confession, thick, stale, and wrong in ways that had no name. It wasn't just the smell. It was a cocktail of rot and bleach, something caught between preservation and decay. Beneath it was a sweeter stench, faint but unmistakable, like something organic had once died here, and the house refused to let go. The floor creaked beneath her boots, not from age, but like it was reacting to her weight, as if the house itself was adjusting. Velvet drapes hung heavy over every window, choking out natural light. Furniture sat under thick sheets like corpses beneath shrouds. Dust coated everything, yet not a single footprint marked the floor ahead of her. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was performative, calculated. The kind of stillness that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. Eleanor felt it immediately, the pressure in her chest, like she'd walked into a room that had been holding its breath for decades and just now decided to exhale. Her ears rang. Her pulse slowed. It didn't feel like an empty home. It felt occupied by absence, not haunted, not alive. Something else entirely, as if the house remembered her, even though she'd never been here before. It started with a portrait, one that didn't match the others, and one that refused to look away. As Eleanor moved deeper into the mansion, she realized the walls weren't just decorated, they were curated, like a shrine built to preserve something no one wanted to say out loud. And that's when she noticed the faces, or more specifically, the ones that were missing. The portraits didn't just feel old, they felt edited. Eleanor moved through the first floor with cautious curiosity, letting her flashlight skim across oil paintings so aged their varnish had cracked into spiderwebs. Gilded frames lined the walls like a gallery of ghosts, each one featuring stiff, stoic family members from generations past. But something was off. In nearly every portrait, someone was missing, not digitally removed, but physically, deliberately. Perfect rectangular cuts where faces used to be. One child gone from a group of 5. A teenage boy erased from a family of 4. The cuts were too smooth, too measured, as if someone had taken a scalpel to history. Not a single painting bore damage beyond the missing figure. No slashes, no rips, just absences. And every time a figure was removed, The remaining faces wore the same expression, hollow grief beneath forced smiles, with a flicker of something that made Eleanor's stomach turn relief. It wasn't vandalism. It was ritual. She looked back down the hallway, suddenly aware that she was completely alone. Or worse, not alone at all, because if the walls could remember, then they were also watching. And something didn't want to be found. It wasn't random. It was precise, predictable, intentional. As Eleanor studied each portrait more closely, a chilling pattern emerged generation after generation. There was always one missing child, always one space carved clean out of the canvas. Not an elder, not an infant, always a child around 12 to 14 years old. In every family depiction, whether dated 1893 or 1967 or even as recent as the 1990s, there were traces of that erased figure, a hand resting on no shoulder, a shadow that didn't match the bodies, a gaze from the others that landed on empty space. It was as if the family had posed, knowing someone would be removed later. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She took photos, hands shaking, mouth dry. It wasn't just a recurring loss. It was a deliberate erasure, a ritual disappearance frozen in oil and brushstroke. And more disturbing than what was missing was the look on the remaining faces. The sadness wasn't deep enough. The eyes weren't soft enough. And beneath every expression of grief was something that felt like victory. She stepped back, spine pressed against the cold wall, suddenly unsure if these portraits were meant to remember the child or celebrate their absence. Either way, someone wanted them forgotten. This wasn't grief, it was choreography. Eleanor's instincts screamed louder than logic, louder than reason, louder than the chill crawling up her spine. She'd spent years investigating disappearances, kids who ran away, were taken, or simply vanished. But this was different. These weren't cases lost to time. These were erased by design. And now, she could feel it. This wasn't just a pattern of missing children, it was a ritual, timed and rehearsed. Every portrait, every cutout, every forced smile told the same silent story, one child removed, always around the same age, always without explanation. She reviewed the timelines in her notebook, heart pounding, roughly every 17 years. The spacing was too clean to be coincidence. Eleanor looked back at the line of portraits like a sequence of offerings, each family sacrificing one to preserve the rest. The missing weren't forgotten, they were necessary. She was no longer in a haunted house. She was inside a system, a cycle, a machine that fed on children, and called it tradition. Suddenly, the dust felt like ash, the silence like held breath, and somewhere in the house, she swore she heard a floorboard creak that didn't come from her own step. The house didn't hide its secrets in the dark, it dressed them like memories and left them in plain sight. Eleanor knew if she wanted answers, she'd have to go deeper, past the curated silence, and into the rooms time had sealed shut. But nothing could prepare her for what she would find in the study, upstairs letters written in code, warnings disguised as whispers, and a name that would return again and again, like a curse carved into history. One name, one boy, repeating across decades, and that name was Thorn. It was tucked beneath dust and silence, an antique roll-top desk, elegant and untouched, until now. One drawer had clearly been forced open. The wood splintered, as if someone had been desperate to find or hide what was inside. Eleanor hesitated, then reached in. What she pulled out weren't family letters or old tax receipts. They were envelopes. Dozens of them, each one yellowed with age, addressed in immaculate handwriting to a single title, the keeper. No return address, no full names, just initials D, W, C, M, A, W, and phrases that chilled her blood. Preparations begin once the moon darkens. The boy will be ready upon his 12th crossing, and worst of all, the harvest must honour the cycle. This wasn't folklore. This was coordination, planning. The language wasn't frantic or panicked, it was calm, reverent, like scripture passed between believers. Eleanor's throat tightened. This wasn't a story of one missing child. This was generational, organised, ritualised. She was holding proof of something that shattered logic and rewired truth. And as she reached for the final letter, her hands trembling, one word was scrawled across its seal in dark red ink. Thorn. These weren't letters. They were blueprints for something unholy. Eleanor spread them out across the study floor, hands shaking, heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted out. Each envelope contained carefully crafted language too vague to raise suspicion, yet too consistent to ignore. The terms repeated over and over. Preparations have begun. The ritual must not be interrupted, and most disturbingly, Thorn will arrive next month. The family is eager. The harvest awaits. It wasn't metaphor. It wasn't poetry. It was scheduling. The tone was reverent, clinical, almost worshipful. Some lines hinted at physical instructions. The room must be sealed in silence. No mirrors, no reflections. The essence must not scatter. These weren't cult ramblings written by madmen. They were operations passed down by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. This was the language of generations who didn't believe they were hiding a crime. They believed they were performing a sacred duty. And the boy named Thorn, he wasn't a guest. He was a requirement, a tradition, a sacrifice dressed in ceremony. And he would come again, just like he always had. Eleanor didn't sleep that night because something in the house didn't want her to. The wind outside had died, the trees stood still, and the walls pressed closer with every passing hour. She lay fully clothed in a sleeping bag on the dusty parlour floor, her flashlight flickering beside her like a dying heartbeat. That's when she heard its footsteps. Soft, slow. Not the creaks of an old house shifting, but deliberate steps across the floor above her. 4 steps, a pause, 4 more, then silence. She held her breath, muscles locked, every nerve on fire. Then another sound, a whisper of pressure against a door hinge, wood groaning, the faint, unmistakable squeak of a doorknob turning just slightly. The footsteps had stopped, right outside a child's bedroom, the same room she hadn't yet explored, the same one mentioned in several of the coded letters. She didn't move, didn't dare breathe. Her mind screamed for logic, but the silence that followed was heavier than any scream. It didn't sound like someone walking. It sounded like someone remembering how to... And that's when she knew whatever was in this house hadn't left. It had been waiting. What Eleanor found the next morning didn't just confirm her worst fear, it tore open a century-old wound the house had tried to keep buried. The child's bedroom was exactly where the footsteps had ended, and what lay behind its sealed wallpaper would change everything. This wasn't just about ghosts or guilt. This was evidence. Physical, preserved, and screaming to be seen. The door creaked open like it had been holding its breath for years. Morning light filtered weakly through a single warped window, illuminating the smallest bedroom on the third floor, a child's room, untouched by time, but heavy with silence. The wallpaper was nautical faded blue anchors, tiny white sailboats drifting across the walls like they were lost at sea. A wooden toy chest sat beneath the window, its lid half open, revealing cracked marbles and a rusted tin soldier. A rocking horse leaned in the corner, its paint peeling like old skin, forever mid-sway. Eleanor didn't speak. Couldn't. She moved through the room slowly, reverently, as if walking through someone else's dream or nightmare. The air here was colder, sharper. Not the kind of cold that comes from a draft, but the kind that seeps from memory. This wasn't a room meant for living. It was a room meant for remembering. Every object felt placed with intention. Every scratch in the floorboard whispered of something that had once tried to escape. And every detail screamed the same name. Even in silence, Thorn. It was the wall that didn't match the shade just slightly off. The wallpaper less faded, like it had been touched more recently than anything else in the room. Eleanor moved closer, running her fingers along the seam where the paper bubbled slightly. When she pressed, it gave hollow. She retrieved a pocket knife from her bag, heart pounding, and began to cut. The wallpaper peeled back like old skin, revealing a wooden panel. Behind it, a hidden alcove, no bigger than a crawl space, and inside, preserved like relics in a private tomb, were children's clothes, neatly folded by decade. A sailor suit, a pair of worn dungarees, a 1970s windbreaker, a modern hoodie still faintly smelling of detergent. Beneath the clothes journals, dozens, each leather-bound, each signed with the same name, Thorn. And scattered between the books were photographs, black and white, Polaroids, faded colour prints, each capturing a boy on the edge of adolescence. Always alone, always solemn, always staring at the camera like they knew what was coming. Eleanor's breath caught. This wasn't storage. This was curation. A silent record of sacrifice, and something wanted it to be found. Every photo, every journal, every boy bore the same name, Thorn. Not a coincidence. Not a lineage, a replication, over decades, different faces, different races, eye colours, hair textures, but the same haunting stare, the same age, and the same chilling inscription inside every journal's first page. Today is my 12th birthday. The Whitmore family has welcomed me as one of their own. Eleanor flipped through trembling pages, written in different handwriting styles, but echoing the same emotional art confusion, awe, subtle fear. Some wrote about the mansion's grandeur, the luxurious meals, the private tutors. But always, by week 3, the tone shifted mention of strange rules, rooms that were off limits, and medicines that made them drowsy. As she traced her fingers across their final entries, the dread became unbearable. Each journal ended exactly 1 year later, or just before Tomorrow. I turn 13. They say I will be part of the family forever. Eleanor felt her stomach lurch. This wasn't adoption. It was ritualized consumption. The boys weren't taken in. They were being prepared, groomed, and eventually erased, not lost, not missing, sacrificed. It was a pattern so precise. It felt more like math than murder. Eleanor laid the journals across the dusty nursery floor in chronological order. The dates etched into the leather covers spanned nearly a century: 1926, 1943, 1960, 1977, 1994, 2011. Each exactly 17 years apart. The alignment was too clean to be coincidence. This was not chaos. This was choreography, a timeline of terror rehearsed across generations, like a dark metronome ticking forward with mechanical precision. Each Thorn had arrived on his 12th birthday. Each had stayed exactly 1 year, and each had disappeared before turning 13. The handwriting styles changed, the paper aged, but the ritual remained untouched, a generational offering, renewed like clockwork. Eleanor's breath grew shallow. She wasn't just uncovering tragedy, she was exposing structure. The kind that only comes from belief systems, not individual madness. This wasn't a crime of passion or a family's dark secret. It was a doctrine, a timeline carved into flesh and silence. And if the last Thorn was in 2011, then something or someone was preparing for the next. The countdown hadn't ended. It was still ticking. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor, surrounded by silence and 6 ghosts. Before her were 6 journals, fanned out like a ritual circle. Each one penned in a different hand. Each one beginning the same way: today is my 12th birthday. The Whitmore family has welcomed me. 6 different boys. 6 different years. 6 different versions of the same nightmare. The ink had faded in places, but the pain hadn't. She could feel it pressing in around her, thick as the dust, heavy as the grief. Each Thorn had been stripped of his identity, reduced to a name not his own, devoured by a family who saw him not as a child, but as currency. She imagined the families left behind, the mothers who never stopped looking, the fathers who drank themselves into silence, the siblings who grew up under the weight of an empty chair. These weren't runaways. They were erasures. And Eleanor realized something brutal. This wasn't just a house of horrors. It was a machine designed to wipe out bloodlines, memory, entire legacies, one sacrifice at a time. And now their stories were in her hands. And the house knew it. None of them ever made it to 13. Not one. Eleanor flipped through the final pages of each journal, and with every turn, the entries became shorter, more fragmented, more afraid. The boys began writing about strange rules, whispers at night, dreams they couldn't wake from. Some mentioned a basement they weren't allowed to enter. Others spoke of headaches, meals that made them dizzy, pills disguised as vitamins. But every journal, every single one, ended just days, sometimes hours, before their 13th birthday, and always with the same final line, like a cruel farewell carved into paper: tomorrow. I become part of the family forever. No pages followed, no goodbyes, no escape. Eleanor felt nausea rise in her throat. These weren't forgotten children. They were scheduled disappearances, calculated, ritualized, and sealed in time. Turning 13 was never the goal. It was the deadline. And the house, the family had always known exactly when to collect. She looked at the date on the last journal, 2011, which meant the cycle was overdue, or worse, already preparing for the next thorn. The Whitmore house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by silence, by complicity, by the cold precision of tradition twisted into horror. Eleanor's discovery wasn't just a revelation, it was a reckoning. Proof that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears family portraits and calls itself legacy. 6 boys, 6 birthdays, 6 disappearances, all erased before 13. And now, the question hangs like a shadow over everything. What happens when the house wants to breathe again? If stories like this shake you, disturb you, or make you question what hides behind old walls and older names, then speak up. Share this story. Save this video. Leave a comment below and tell us what you think really happened to Thorn. And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be uncovered, not buried, subscribe now. We're just getting started. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that were never supposed to be told.